History is a tale that reminds us of who we are and gives us clues on how to strive for a better future. Bota Bota has been, for 11 years now, part of the old port scenery and is loved by many worldwide. But to love this part of town is to also understand what it was and how it has changed throughout the years. Rito Joseph is a historical walker, shedding light on Montreal's past. Through his guided walks, he gives us a better understanding of the city, helping us time travel and recognize the role Montreal played in slavery. By navigating the old port's cobblestone streets, he invites us to listen to the city and to look beyond what we know, moving collective consciousness, changing the narrative, and slowly bridging a gap between the past, the present, and the future. I'm your host, Constance Carpenez, and you're listening to Anchor Point, Bota Bota's podcast. Hi, Rito.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So as we know, Bota Bota is docked in the old port of Montreal. Mm-hmm. And it so happens that you, amongst many other things, are a historical tour guide. And I do believe you know many neighborhoods, but specifically the old port, kind of like the back of your hand.
Somewhat. Yeah.
Somewhat. And as we know as well, Bota Bota is about wellness and well-being. And I believe that history has a huge role in a population's general wellness. Mm-hmm. And that is the reason why you're here with us today, is to talk about a portion of history, of Canadian and Montreal history, mm-hmm. that not many Montrealers and Canadians are aware of.
Yeah.
So with that long-winded introduction done, I'd like you to introduce yourself. Who is Rito Joseph? A little background, personal, professional background.
Yeah, well, my name is Rito Joseph. I'm born and raised on the east side of Montreal in a neighborhood called Saint-Michel. I grew up, from a working class family. And I went to the French school system here, and then I ended up living in different parts of North America, in the United States, in New York for a little while, in Calgary. I wandered around the West Coast, in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Vegas. Came back to Montreal, I would say self-taught, even though I've been mentored, by people, such as Professor Lasconi, but I'm a self-taught. Wouldn't call myself historians because people actually go to universities to have degrees to be historians, so I wouldn't call myself historians, but I would say I'm a history lover that researches a lot, I'm just a fan of, DIY culture. And that led me to do what I do. I mean, that led us to, meeting each other and, doing this interview. But, other than that, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a godfather. I'm a cousin, I'm a friend. And I just happen to do a lot of different things in regards to history, arts, music, culture. Previously, in my previous life, I was also a basketball player.
Wow. Yeah. Look at that.
In one of my previous lives.
Right.
I dabbled around music too for a little while, as a producer, sound engineer a little bit. And, right now I'm really, I'm a book lover. Mm-hmm. I love to read. I love to, learn. I love to research, and I love to share my findings.
I love that. So many stories, so many identities, too.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be versatile if you really want to go
Absolutely.
Somewhere. Yeah.
I agree. So you started doing research about African slaves in Canada around 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you bring us back to what sparked this interest in this journey?
Definitely. Well, before I start to take you back, I would also want to mention that for the sake of the conversation, we will use the word enslaved instead of slaves.
Okay.
But I totally get, what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I started to research about enslaved people here in Montreal because the narrative here, when it comes to North America, When it comes to, people in state of servitude, we mostly look to the United States. Unbeknownst to us that, before the United States was an independent country, 1/3 of what is part of the United States was part of New France. And the enslavement in North America, the enslavement of people, indigenous people of African descent, started in New France. And I think for me, when you talk about New France, you really talk about 3 cities: Quebec City, Trois-Rivières, Montreal. So by doing the research, I also wanted to find my place in this historical lineage that, they don't teach you when you go to school here.
Right.
I got to research. I got to read, Dorothy Williams' work, historian Dorothy Williams, Paul Femu Brown, a lot of these researchers too. Dr. Afro Cooper as well was one of them. I have so many names coming in my head. Yeah. But for me, it was mostly about taking your space within the society that doesn't really allow you to create your own identity. Mm-hmm. And again, I also want to say that, the Black presence in Canada didn't start with slavery, mm-hmm. but afterwards, people of African descent were definitely enslaved here in this place that is, was called New France, or the province of Quebec. And it's also the inception of the country that we now know as Canada. And I find that for me, it's really important because then when you go back and you deconstruct history, you kind of understand that there's a social hierarchy that I would say we don't really pay attention to those things because I feel like, we receive a biased education. Mm-hmm. And the education that you receive in many ways, it programs you for the paradigm in which you're evolving. You see, so I guess for me, it was really trying to disconnect myself from something that had been taught to me, had been given to me, and try to reclaim something else that I felt I had inside. And I felt that if I feel that I have this inside of me, I may not be the only one. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's to make a long story short.
I love that, but it's also so telling of I guess the person that you are, because the whole deconstructing aspect of taking yourself out of what you were taught from education from since you were a kid, mm-hmm. to actually questioning yourself and being is there more to this? Mm-hmm. Is this true? Is this, it's
what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I commend you for that.
Thank you very much.
So you mentioned her in your answer earlier, but Dr. Afua Cooper mm-hmm.
Is
a historian as well.
Yep.
And she has mentioned in the past that slavery is Canada's best kept secret.
Definitely.
With this in mind, this is kind of a two-tone question, but with this in mind, can you tell us about how slavery started and in Canada or Montreal, and what do you think she meant by this statement?
That's a good question. How it started? Well, of course, it started as, the British bringing, this young boy, might have been known by the name of Olivier Lejeune when, mm-hmm. when he got here, he was, the British occupied Quebec City for about 2-3 years, and Samuel de Champlain was exiled in the UK in London. So while this was happening, he was giving to, this merchant, Le Bailly, and afterwards that, sold him to Guillaume Couillard, which, is a direct ancestor of ex or past Prime Minister of Quebec, Philippe Couillard. Mm. And then he was given to the clergy. So Father Paul Lejeune, which also, how as the first enslaved people of African descent, or the first registered one, I would say. Mm. He was also one of the first 2 students in the school system here in Quebec, which the other one was indigenous one. He is African one, and indigenous both enslaved by the clergy. And then, afterwards, this is, and again, when we talk about the history of slavery here, of course, Canada never had as many enslaved people, as the United States. So I don't want to make it a numbers game, because a lot of times people would say, yeah, but it wasn't, as many people here or as many enslaved people here. And under the French regime, most enslaved people were indigenous, which they called the Pawnees. They went and got from the Midwest, and afterwards, they brought them back here. And it was, considered luxury to have a African one. So this is how history tells us that it started here in New France, and afterwards, of course, people, bought their enslaved Africans and indigenous enslaved markets here in Quebec City and Trois-Rivières, along the St. Lawrence River. And then at times, when they had wars between French and the British, they would have war captives as well, or they would go to the Caribbean to get them too, because the Caribbean would be the home base of most European powers or countries in those days, if I may call it like this. Yeah. But then Dr. Afua Cooper, historians, I think she's the head and dean's the history department at Dalhousie University. She said when she says that slavery is Canada's best kept secret, she talks about the fact that I think the way Canada markets itself on the international scene, it's like, the yin and yang, and the United States would be yin and Canada would be yang, because, of course, it did happen that throughout history, people of African descent that were enslaved in the United States did fight on the British side and then fled to Canada, where they were promised land, so they ended up in Canada. Also, the story that's mostly known would be the Underground Railroad. Yeah. Of people that left the United States. So with that in mind, this is the piece of history that we keep when we think of Canada, the North Star. Yeah. Right. So in that sense, talking about the enslavement of people here becomes taboo, because it's not something that's being taught in schools, or I guess, you need to have a level of higher education if you want to know about that. Right. And it's also not something that's part of the collective consciousness. So this would definitely spark not only a debate, but people get outraged. Yeah. When it's time to talk about, the enslavement of people on this land. And when it comes to Montreal was definitely for a long time just the epicenter of, Canada, until really recently, until the 60s or the 70s. So, of course, they were definitely under the British regime. There were mostly people of African descent that were enslaved here, more than the natives. So, yeah.
It's funny that you should mention that it's not the part of history that we like to keep, because I was doing research on this topic because I didn't know much about it. And I was listening to podcasts and reading stuff. And one of the things that I kept on seeing and hearing was that in the past, people weren't shy about, having enslaved people, because there's newspaper articles about selling enslaved people or enslaved people that had run away. Yeah. So there's a ton of documentation that proves that this existed. Yeah. So it just baffles me that there's so much information like that you can touch and you can see. Yeah,
definitely.
But that it's so buried deep down into it's quite funny. It's eerie.
It's a lot of resistance when it comes to telling that side of history. You mentioned a lot of newspaper articles, definitely. I mean, and this is also what would tell us that, for a little while, there was a lot of runaway slaves or enslaved people in Montreal that fled, that, wanted to be in control of their lives. So that also tells us something about what used to happen here. Yeah. The fact that it's not being mentioned in, school curriculums, or the fact that, it's a taboo subject to this day in 2022. It says a lot about, also the social climate in which we're, living or evolving as human beings,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about well, I guess, so we met prior to this interview.
Yeah.
I had the chance of taking a nice brisk walk.
Yeah.
Under the January sun.
Cold, yeah. Yeah. Canadian winter.
Canadian winter. It's no joke. So we had a really nice walk, and so you gave me a small tour of what you usually do as a tour guide. You don't give tours anymore in the winter,
I'll do for Black History Month, yeah.
Right. So I was lucky enough to be a part of your little walk in January.
No problem at all.
And you showed me around a few places that had their ties with this part of history that I had no idea about, and there's no plaques or anything to showcase that. Can you tell us a bit about the role of the old port, and if there's some landmarks or spots that our listeners can visualize that, were a part of this history?
Well, when it comes to Old Port, I mean, it's the historical neighborhood of Montreal. I guess, people would say it's the oldest one, although, can you really say if there's the oldest neighborhood or not? I mean, that's, up for debate, but I get it. It's definitely the historical one where, a lot of history happened. But Old Port plays a major role in that because it's the gateway, to, how not only, Europeans got here, but also indigenous people here. This is where they used to meet first. Jojage was this island where, the First Nations met, where they congregate to go hunting, to, we talk about the fur trading and the history of Canada. Well, they've been doing it for the past thousands of years. They used to come to Montreal to get fur too, to harvest the land too, maize. So Old Port, then when we talk about, the arrival of, the first Europeans, Old Port is the place that you kind of understand that this is where the colonial history of not only Montreal or Quebec starts. I mean, okay, people would say it starts in Quebec City because Quebec City was founded, some 30 years before, 20-something years before Montreal. But Old Port of Montreal becomes the center of colonial North America for many years, I would say for maybe 2 centuries. And this is a place where you had a lot of people of European descent that lived there, people of African descent throughout the years that lived there, indigenous people most definitely. And this is also a place where, because it was, I would say it was the downtown part of, Ville Marie, or even, British Montreal after, it was conquered. This was also a place where, you'd have open air markets. They would have public executions. They would have, public torture of people, of thieves, enslaved people, or, sometimes even like teenagers too. That would, I don't know, you stole a car or something, you would get publicly tortured. And I feel like nowadays, because we don't know much about that history, we walk in Old Port and we absorb a lot of that energy. But we don't really know, we don't really understand where it comes from. Yep. You see? So, yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. The second part of this question was, are there any buildings or places that you can tell us about that you showed me a week ago?
The Grey Nuns.
Did you show me the Grey Nuns?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
We walked by the Grey Nuns.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, the Grey Nuns. I think the Grey Nuns, they have an interesting building. It has been standing since the 16, if I'm not mistaken. Well, 16 or late 1600s or early 1700s. It was founded by Marguerite Duville, so right in front of Place Duville, right next to Place Duville.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting because to the Grey Nuns, we owe them, I guess, one of the first hospitals, general hospitals. And but also, there were the clergy in general, not only the Grey Nuns, but the clergy in general would be some of the major slave owners in those days, right? They would have enslaved people working for them. They would buy them. They would sell them. And I think that nowadays it would be nice to have some sort of recognition, because a lot of these people are canonized, right? And to have some sort of recognition to say, this is what happened on our land. Not to dismiss the rest of the work that has been done by them, but to acknowledge
absolutely
this, I guess, purposely omitted piece of history, if I may call it like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, amongst other places, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And what really intrigued me when we were taking that walk is that we walked past this, I don't know if that building has like a name, but it used to be a bank, like the big one with the cafe inside.
Yeah.
And so that building, when you walk in the old port, you can't miss it. Like it's so big, and it used to be a bank.
Yeah.
And we stood in front of it, and you told me that it used to be a cemetery for enslaved people.
Yeah.
So African enslaved people, but also indigenous or poor people.
Yeah.
And I was baffled by that because obviously there are no markings of any kind.
No recognition whatsoever.
At all. And we stepped closer to the building, and I saw that on the outside wall of that building was engraved something like, oh, this used to be like a bank.
In 1926.
Right.
Yeah, RBC.
And I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, I know we're in a world all about money, but like, excuse me.
Yeah.
I just found it crazy that, you know, and as you said, it means a lot because before, if this was a cemetery for enslaved people, that means that we were kind of like on the outskirts of town as well. Like this wasn't like the bustling part of the city that like maybe we know today.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So it's just so crazy to look at this piece of building and be like, this is so much more historical than we could even fathom.
Yeah,
at this
definitely.
point.
Yeah.
It was, anyways, I was baffled. And this is when we took our walk with all the other buildings and places. There's a spot you took me to, like a small little park. And you told me that this is where they celebrated the end of slavery. And you said something that I loved, and I think I will remember until the day I die. You said, it's funny because you can't divorce somebody you were never married to.
Yeah, definitely.
And that resonated a lot. I really love that. I will be using that again. But what I mean by that is that, you know, if we know that there was an end to slavery, there must have been a beginning.
Yeah.
And in that park, there are no markings as well. It's just like a random park.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was just a tidbit of information that I learned. But I was wondering, as your work as a tour guide, has this changed since you started? Did it change anything for you personally? Did that journey do anything for you?
No, for sure. Because I'm not, I would say, I'm not quote unquote a tour guide in the real sense of it. I like to call myself an historical walker,
I like that.
So
Okay.
I call it historical walks,
Yes.
promenade historique.
C'est vrai.
But it definitely changed because now, when you look at the landscape, you look at the scenery, or you look at, anything you take a close look at, it talks to you, right?
Yeah.
You now start to understand that, it's beyond what you can imagine, what you see, what you know of that place, or maybe it's somewhere you've been all your life. But then, you realize, wow, all my life I've been feeding into some sort of energy that I had no idea what happened here. But now that you know, you not only you feel like you want to share it, but you feel like, I feel like knowing at least is the first step to being part of some sort of solution.
Yeah.
And also, I feel if we, as a society, if we want to have certain conversations in order to move forward, we need to know certain things that happened in the past that shape the future, which is our present.
Absolutely.
And how we're going to shape the future in regards to what we know of the past. You see, so for me, I see that, we treat the past, the present, and the future as if they're different spaces, but it's a whole, and so for me, it definitely, I wouldn't say it changed me. I would say it added to my sensitivity in regards to, being in a space, sharing a space with other people, and just understanding that, okay, this is not only, history, this is how society designed it for us to live within, what is now known as a city or a province or a country, if I may say so.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why in the introduction, I was talking about the general wellness of a population. For me, it goes so much deeper than just like, I drink a cup of water every day and like whatever, like I do my Pilates. Like, no, like it's all about mending and like bridging that gap between literally three things. It's past, present, future.
Yeah.
So how do you think that the whitewashing of Canadian history has had an impact today on Canadian and Montreal social justice, and I guess in general for the Black community today?
That's a good question. I think that, when it comes to, the whitewashing of Black history here, we're blinded to a lot of, biased views of, what we know of people of African descent that, not only lived here, but, they were part of major things. They started, Canada had a lot of, Black neighborhoods, and they were gentrified. A lot of those neighborhoods, whether it's, Hogan's Alley in Vancouver in 1967, that same year, or the area that's in Toronto, or Bloor and Bathurst too, and Calgary as well, in Montreal, now that became what became known as Little Burgundy, Africville, and Halifax. So knowing history, I feel like it would help us to at least have certain conversations, certain uncomfortable conversations, because if you really want to be an actor of change, you have to get uncomfortable. I mean, it's like moving. If you want to move to a better place, you found the place. It's good. Now you have a new place, but you have to move into it.
Absolutely.
And it's not the fun part, but it's the essential part. If you want to move into your new space, and now you have to, call the mover, lift the couch,
look at the rates.
Try to make it through the door so they don't break your stuff.
Absolutely.
So it's uncomfortable to move, but you're moving to a better place.
And once you're done,
it's
fabulous.
It's over with.
Yeah.
And then you can move on to different things. But
Absolutely.
we haven't, we're not past that.
We haven't called the movers yet.
No. And I feel like, we're looking for reasons not to. And for me, this is why, in this day and age, if you have people in position of power, people that govern, they tell you, no, that never happened here. But history clearly shows us it happened. Historians researched it. Sociologists researched it. In universities in Europe, in universities in the United States, all over Canada, they researched about New France is at the catalyst of the colonization of North America. So when people tell you about, no, forget it. Cadillac in Detroit, he came from Montreal. He left in 1699. Sieur Lemoyne d'Iberville left. People that the Mississippi was founded by French Canadians. So St. Louis. So a lot of those places, for me, it's like, it's not so much about who did what, who didn't. It's about just acknowledge what happened.
Absolutely.
And understand that the impact is far beyond these geographical places of northeast of North America.
Yeah. And it's in the same idea that like it's useless to like compare slavery from the U.S. and Canada. As you said, it's not about numbers. It's not about like that. It's just, it happened.
Yeah.
Like it's a fact.
It's a fact.
Absolutely.
It's a fact. And this is the uncomfortable conversation too. And the reason why I say not to compare is because we talk about the act and we're not talking about the amount of people. I'll give you an example, which is a really uncomfortable example. Mm-hmm. If you live in a neighborhood and let's say, you live in a city and you happen to know that there are 30 rapists that live in the city next to you, but we only know 5 of them in our city. Mm-hmm. Would we say it's only 5 we're safe? Mm. It's kind of, I'm taking it there because, it's, So,
I see. I see.
Excuse to everyone that, encountered,
absolutely
those people.
Yeah. Are there any reparations available at this day for people who, I guess before I ask this question, is there a way for us to find enslaved people, not find them, but to retrace them, the descendants?
It's really hard because of a lot of the different movements that happened. It would be really, really hard because throughout the years, or I guess the centuries, a lot of them now maybe have white descendants. Mm. A lot left too. Lots, they left or went to different cities. Some went to the United States. Some went to, some went west, in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. A lot of people of African descent went west. A lot of farmers, a lot of black farmers. It would be really hard, but we'd have to do a DNA test. Now, what I would say is that if most of these descendants happen to be white or, I guess, Caucasians, then it would be nice for them to think of ways how they can, get the black community involved in those reparations.
Yeah.
Because, it wasn't only on plantations that enslaved people were used. They were builders. They kept the house. They built structures. They were part of, building bridges, and all the work that has been done for the society to exist the way we see it. They were part of it.
Absolutely.
And never mind the climate. It's the act of enslaving. So I think we would have to do a DNA test to see. Yeah.
That's interesting. Is there a way, do you think, that we could reform the education system in a way to bring some sort of repair process? Because I know that there are financial reparations, for instance, but I believe that also just historical reparations, as in, let's bring that to our education system. Let's write it in history books. Let's talk about it. Let's have these uncomfortable conversations in school, because that's where you learn most of the stuff. yeah,
that would be nice. I think it would be nice because you still have descendants of people from the Underground Railroad. One of the most known examples would be Bud Jones. His family came here in the 1850s. He ended up, he served in the army. He went to the Korea War. He was a boxer. He did many things. Archivist, historian. I think he died recently. So definitely, because you have people such as Webster that's doing the work. Not only him, but you have many people that are going in schools and, doing conferences, presentations, workshops. But I think what we need right now is to sit down with the people who have the information, who have the knowledge, the research, who have the passion, and to understand or to maybe find out how we can create or build a curriculum based on the researches that already have been done in the past and what we, what the newly found information tell us about this not so distant past.
Yeah.
And also to just be at peace with, the fact that this may make us feel uncomfortable, but it is what it is. And I also understand that, the reason why I say education is biased here, because I get it that here, we want to talk about French and the British, and which totally makes sense in a colonial aspect of it. But we also have to learn, first we have to learn about the indigenous people.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to learn about them and not only say who was this and that, but for them to come and teach us their history. We want to hear it from them. And then we can link the colonial history and the people that were part of it to what was known as, I guess, Jojake or, Kanawake and all those places, you know, but as of now, it would be really hard to, move a step forward if we don't acknowledge what existed before.
I see that. I completely see that.
Yeah.
We talked about this when we met last week, but I remember, so I did part of my high school in Montreal, and I had to take the Canadian history test in order to move on to going to college here potentially. And I remember sitting in my class and being like, I can't believe that this is it. Like, I cannot begin to understand how we can talk about Indigenous people, for instance, and just talk about like their kayaks and like how they made their tents and like whatever. I was like, I feel like there's a missing link somewhere. So if you look at that, I honestly, this was like over 10 years ago, so it might have changed. I do not know.
Slightly.
But I'm just, if we're just barely talking about the Indigenous people and how we treated them, but not even, because we don't talk about that. I like can't even begin to wonder how we're going to speak about, enslaved people and African people here, et cetera. So I really like what you're saying about if tomorrow we were to change everything, we wouldn't just be able to talk about it as it is.
Unfortunately not.
We'd have to go back hundreds of years.
Yeah, maybe even thousands.
Maybe even thousands, and deconstruct everything.
Yeah.
But I find that so fascinating, though.
It is.
It's beautiful to know that it is possible, and it obviously will never erase what happened, and that is not the purpose. But there's a lot of healing that can be possible.
Yeah.
And I find hope in that.
Yeah. I feel just like you. For me, it's even beyond hope. It's also a way for me to time travel, like all the sci-fi geeks out there.
I love that.
It's time traveling too. It's in an icon language. There's something called the Sankofa, which talks about taking it in the past and bringing it to the future. Which a lot of Afro descendants that go to Africa, we call it Sankofa. So yeah, I think there's an element of traveling through the DNA, the memories, space and time. And I guess, like you said, not fixing things, but acknowledging, understanding things to, bring it forward to the future, which would be our present, and alter the future, which is the future, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, because that's the only thing we can change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So.
And, but again, we need to be in a space where collective consciousness understands not only the need to do so, but also understand that it's also a way for them to heal from their own traumas. Because if you refuse to face your traumas, you keep them in the closet, it's going to stink sooner or later. You're going to have to...
You're in for a ride.
Yeah. Listen, Eminem said it, cleaning out the closet. So you're going to need to clean the closet sooner or later. And I find that here, it's maybe the main issue here is that we refuse to, be upfront about, the traumas, the different ideologies, views, or system of values, which is, I get it. It could be different, but sooner or later, we're going to have to face the truth. And not facing the truth makes it that it's hard to acknowledge others when you don't face your own truth.
Yeah. Do you think it's harder for Canadians to talk about this as well? Because I guess we're kind of depicted as this like population of people that doesn't like to say mean things. Like we're always kind of like the nice guys in a sense. And then I guess Americans are more like, they'll like say whatever's on their mind. And then us Canadians are always like kind of on the edge because we don't know how to. Do you think that's also because it's kind of like in our DNA that we don't like to talk about stuff that hurts?
Maybe, maybe. I think also, historically speaking, in Canada, it doesn't teach much about, like, I guess I would say teach much because I'm not saying it was never any revolution here. Although, people would say, okay, Révolution Tranquille in the 60s. People would say the Patriots in the 1830s, But I guess, we don't have that notion of, I guess, just going against the grain, I guess like a Prise de la Bastille 1789 or like, Bois Caïman 1791 or I guess, 1776 down south and there's not this notion of, just going against the grain or I guess I'm generalizing, of course.
Of course.
Of course I'm generalizing, but I'm talking about, collective consciousness as we know it today.
Absolutely.
And also, at times we look at the United States like they're crazy. So, so I feel like, not to look crazy just like them.
Right.
We wouldn't want to do the same thing. And me, I don't encourage anyone to do the same thing as the next person or as your neighbor. But I would encourage people to look at what you feel is right and wrong within your heart. Or I guess if it's not within your heart, even within society as you see it. And if you feel like something doesn't make sense, then you have to call it out.
Yeah.
Because if you don't call it out, you're not being part of the solution. And if you're not part of the solution, then you're definitely part of the problem. And this is, I think, one of the main issues here in Canada in that sense, Yeah.
Absolutely. So in the first episode of this second season, with our guest, we spoke about wellness and how we consider it to be a privilege. Wellness is a privilege because before wellness and well-being, comes a roof over one's head, access to food and clean water and just accommodations and like basic things in general. And then wellness comes after.
Yeah.
With this in mind, do you believe that the Black community in Montreal, or just in Canada in general, today has easily access to well-being and wellness?
Oh, no, definitely not easily. For sure not. I would say, again, no, it's still not easy to find a place to live. You still, in many aspects, you have to look a certain way to find certain employers to hire you, or, you have to present yourself a certain way, which I get, we're living in this, I guess I was going to say simulation, but, so you have to move according to certain codes. But no, it's definitely not easy because, again, because of the biased views or the subconscious biased views that people have, people wouldn't even know what they're doing sometimes, So sometimes, you're going to look for an apartment, from the body language of the person or that landlord, that person, you're not going to get it. Or, you have to present yourself a certain way. And again, when I say present yourself a certain way, I encourage everyone to go out there and look clean. That's not what I'm saying. But we're just not a monolith, and it's not easy to go past the biased views. So at times, I guess you talk about, the Maslow pyramid, where at the bottom, you have, shelter and food. And I guess when this is not easy to cover, then it makes it hard to just climb up the pyramid, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, a lot of us, I've never really moved past, I guess, the second or third stage in the pyramid.
Yeah.
And would I say it's easy in Canada and Montreal? It's still pretty hard. It's still not easy. But this is why, understanding your, environment becomes important, because then when it's not easy, you know how to move around if you understand the environment. But at the same time, the people that make it hard for you, or the person that makes it hard, I would say, they don't know that they also have their own traumas that they're dealing with, because they wouldn't even know that they're making it hard for you. Or sometimes when they know, they couldn't even explain why they're making it hard for you. You see? So yeah, it's definitely not easy till this day. But, it's like anything else. You still have to keep it moving.
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that you were potentially going to do walks for Black History Month.
Yeah.
We know that Black History Month happens in February.
Yeah.
And I was doing some research, and in 2021, Black History Month celebrated its 25th anniversary.
Yeah.
And it had a tagline for that anniversary, and it was, "The future is now." If you had to come up with a tagline for 2022 for Black History Month, what would it be?
Wow. Okay.
We might need another hour for this.
What would it be? Wow. That's a good question. And I saw that question too, but I thought about it like, wow, what would it be? Know thyself. Yeah, I think the tagline would be know thyself. I think it starts from there. I think the rest will come after, but know thyself. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because it speaks to a large plethora of people.
Yeah. Definitely know thyself. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, we're going to pitch that.
For the whole month of Black History, know thyself.
Know thyself. For your walks, you can be like, this is the first tagline.
Know thyself. Definitely.
Can you tell us what your definition of wellness is, and do you practice it on a daily basis? What does it look like for you? What does wellness mean to you?
That's a good question. What does wellness mean for me? I think it's being at peace with myself. Being at peace with myself, being able to strive for my goals, being able to, just cherish what I have, and, being at peace with my loved ones, but also, putting myself in a space where, I'm not saying I'm unbothered, but I'm in control of my energy. Yeah. I'm in control of, what type of energy comes into my life or walks out of it. And, I think when it comes to wellness, it's mind, body, and soul. It would be, feeding your mind, feeding your brain, feeding your heart, feeding your soul, feeding your body. I would. I mean, long story short, because I can go on and on, but I would, put it like this for now.
Fabulous. One last question. If there's anything that, I guess, key points that that you want people to remember after your walks, but also maybe after this interview, what would they be?
It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter, your ethnicity. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what language you speak. You can always be part of the solution if you choose to be.
I love that.
It's, there are no right or wrong answers. As long as you want to be part of the solution, you will be part of the solution.
Awesome. Where can we find you online, your walks, your works?
I have a website, which is www.ritojoseph.com, where you can find me. And you can also write me in regards to, I guess if you want, I do conferences, workshops, presentations, research, also, walking tours. Also for the walking tours, it would be on blackmontrealexperiences.com. Myself, I'm in social medias, on Facebook, my name Rito Joseph. On Instagram too, Rito Joseph. You can type my name, or you could put it RJ_CHAM. And also at Black Montreal Experiences as well on Instagram. That's pretty much where I'm at. If you Black Montreal Experiences is where I'm gonna post for the walking tours, and my personal page is where I post some of my researches, findings sometimes every now and then.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rito.
Thank you, Constance, for having me.
We'll see you again soon.
Definitely. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed my time here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.